Hello, everybody.
Hello. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar. The choice of the topic today comes from a simple observation that we've made over the past month, is that a lot of publishers understand quite well why data and analytics are important and why it's essential to monitor what's happening on the ad stack, essentially to find out if there are issues in the settings, to find out if the monetization is broken in some elements of the inventory. But we still see a lot of publishers struggle when it comes to activate the data in order to generate actual revenue increase in a proactive way, basically. So use the data that is at hand, that is excessively powerful, but the question is how to use this data to generate uplift. So this is the topic for today, how to boost ad revenues with analytics. And we're going to base our webinar basically on our own experience. But these advice that we're going to share today, the reasonings and also the insights, should work with any good and strong analytical tool that allows you to collect your monetization data. So let Adrien tell us a quick word about PubStack before we start.
Yes, hello, everybody. So before going further, because we had some issues in the past, I just want to make sure that everybody is seeing the slides. So if you don't see the slides for any reason, you can post it in the chat section. Also, if you have any questions at any point, please also ask those questions either in the chat or in the questions sections. So a little bit about PubStack and what we do. Basically, we are a SaaS company offering a monitoring and analytics platform for publishers who need to monitor their programmatic ad revenue. Thanks to the very granular data that we provide, they are able to make better decisions and to maximize their revenue. We work with more than 60 clients, mostly in Europe for now. And we deal with quite a lot of ad calls because we collect 50 billion ad calls every month. And there's like more than $200 million of ad revenue going through our tool every year. So a little bit about us also. So I'm Adrian. I'm a data analyst here at PubStack. I've been working in the ad tech industry for 5 years. And I'm here with Danny, if you want to say a quick word.
Nice to meet you, everybody. I'm a solutions engineer at PubStack, and my role is primarily to help our publishers use the platform and activate the data that's in the platform, and in order to take the right decisions based on the insights that we share with them, based on reasoning that we share with them, that is obviously based on the data and also based on the knowledge that we share, because we've come across, as Adrien said, quite a lot of very concrete use cases with the many publishers that we're working with and the many auctions that we monitor. So we share all this information and we make sure that the publisher is aware of what is possible and what the data means to them.
Thank you, Danny. So before we go, we're going to run some polls 3 times, I guess, during this webinar. So the idea is to collect some feedback from you guys. So the first one is now, and it's basically to know which analytic tool you are using, if you are using any, to analyze your ad revenue, basically, and your data. So let's go. So the first topic we want to address today is the idea of A/B testing, because we're going to talk about a lot of optimizations, of potential optimizations, and a way to increase the ad revenue. But to do that, we should talk first about how to measure correctly the uplift or the downlift that can be brought by a change in your setup. And that's the reason for A/B testing. So I guess that most of you guys are aware of what is A/B testing, but just for the sake of it, the idea of A/B testing is to split your traffic into several populations that have the same characteristics. And the idea is to have different setups on each population. And in the end, you want to compare the revenue and the other metrics that you're interested in on each population. That's the best way to proceed when you want to test different setups. So why is it the best way to proceed? What are the alternatives to A/B testing? The first alternative would be to roll out your setup change on 100% of your inventory and do what we call a before-after analysis. Okay, you look at what was before the change, what the revenue is after, and basically you see if it's an uplift or a downlift. That's the most basic way to do it, but there are a lot of bias because there's a seasonality impact, because obviously there's no reason for the ad revenue to be flat over the before and after period if you hadn't made any change to the setup. So obviously you're going to be blind on the seasonality effect, and your conclusion might be misguided because of that. One of the other possibility is to only roll out your new setup on a few ad units or on a given site and leave all the other sites or ad units untouched. That's a better alternative than the first one because you now have a benchmark to estimate the seasonality effect. The site or the ad units where you didn't roll out your new setup are going to be your benchmark. And if the revenue increased by 10% between the two periods, the before and after periods, you can now estimate that your seasonality is a plus 10%, and you can compare the evolution on your ad units or setup where you rolled out your change and see if it's more or less than plus 10%. But again, that's not ideal because there's no specific reason for which two given websites would have the exact same seasonality, okay? So the ideal way to do it is by A/B testing it because there's no before and after period. You're running the test, and at the same time, you have two populations that have the same characteristic, and so you get rid of the seasonality effect. Okay, so how to do it, basically, if you want to A/B test? You have to split your traffic, okay? It can be at several granularity. It can be at page view level, at ad code level, at user level. The best granularity, obviously, is at ad code level, but it will work also if you're only at page view level or at user level. And you want to split this traffic into several groups. One group for everything that you want to test, basically, every variation of what you want to test. It's important to talk also about the size of the group, okay? If you want to implement something that you deem risky, you may want to be conservative and only roll it out on like 10% or 20% of your traffic, obviously. If it's something that is less risky, you can do a 50-50 split, okay? The only thing to keep in mind is that it depends on the volume of ad requests you get and the volume of your traffic, but you have to have a minimal number of ad calls for the noise to be taken out. Meaning if you're doing a 1%, 99% A/B test with 10,000 ad calls a day, or even 1,000 ad calls a day, you ain't gonna see nothing, basically. Or what you're going to see is going to be very noisy, and you won't be able to go to a conclusions. So now that you split your traffic, you need to monitor also the A/B test. Okay, one good practice is to start the first few days of the A/B test with a small percentage population. Make sure that you're breaking nothing. Okay, and when you see that it's okay, you didn't break anything, revenue is not zero on the test population, you can increase your the percentage of the population. And finally, you need to analyze it. Analyze it is really the easy part, because if you only look at revenue, for instance, and if it's a 50-50 split, you just compare the revenue from both groups. Or if it's a 10-90% split, you just have to do a simple multiplication and it's done. But to be able to analyze it, you need an analytic tool, or you need Google Ad Manager. So for Google Ad Manager, for instance, what you can do to identify your population is to set up key values in which you're going to tell Google Ad Manager on which population you are. Okay, so basically when you're sending an ad call to Google Ad Manager, it embarks a key value, which can be called A/B testing, for instance, with the number of the population. And that's the way you're going to be able to find the revenue associated with the different population groups. So finally, what you can use an A/B test for, it can be used for a lot of stuff. Here are a few examples of what we did here at PubStack with our publishers. We did A/B testing to measure the incremental value coming from a new SSP, to test adding new sizes on a given site and a given ad unit, test different floor prices, even if it's more complicated A/B testing, because you need to duplicate the ad unit, but I won't go into that right now. You can do A/B test to test a new page layout, to test different timeout configuration within Prebid, or to test different refresh strategies. Do you want to refresh in view, out of view, different timer every 10 seconds, 20 seconds, etc., etc. Okay? And in the end, the results you are going to get with an A/B test is a very simple graph, as you see on the right, with the test group here on the left and the control group on the right. And the difference between the two, which is in green here, is your incremental revenue, which is brought by the control group here, the test group here, sorry. So that's for the principle of the A/B testing. Now to go into details on how to apply that and in which fields you can apply that, I'm going to let Danny take over.
Thank you, Adrien. So this is essential to start with A/B testing because, as Adrien said, best, most reliable way to move forward. And also a lot of the insights that we're going to share today were found out through A/B testing. So it feels very relevant to us that everybody is aware as to how we get our insights at PubStack, and how you as well can do the same kind of tests to earn the same kind of incrementality that we can generate. So we're going to start very basic with bidders' performances. So this will be about optimizing and maximizing the value that is brought by each of the SSPs that is plugged into the inventory. Then we will see how you can create value with floor prices. Then how analytics can help you manage timeouts. We will also talk about ad discrepancies and why ad discrepancies may be the sign that you're leaving money on the table. Finally, I will speak about header bidding density and what this metric shows about the state of the competition in your on your inventory. And in the end, Adrien will share with you the insights that we found on viewability, what is the impact of viewability numbers, and what you can do about it, and also refresh. Okay, so let's start with bidders' performances. So we'll spend 2 slides on this. The first thing that will be very helpful with regards to maximizing SSP value if you have access to analytics data is that you will be able to find right away if you have gaps in the mapping of your ad units. So very simply, having access to well-organized and and very granular analytics data will help you spot immediately if you have an ad unit that is not plugged into an SSP, or if you have maybe an ad unit on mobile, on desktop that is not plugged into an SSP. You will be able to check if you are sending the same number of bid requests to all of your SSPs on each of your ad units. And obviously, if you find that it is not the case, then this means that you have some sections of your inventory, some instances of your ad units that are not covered by your SSP. And the action is obviously to go and check within the wrapper what is missing. Another very common practice is to identify where you have a size that is missing. So to do that, what we do is we list all of the available sizes that are on the website, and we don't even need to go and look at the page to know what sizes are available. We simply need to look at what sizes are printing. And what we do is list all of the sizes that are printing, meaning that there is at least one SSP that is printing on those size or ADEX. And then we look and we check if you have other SSPs that are not printing at all on some of those sizes that are available. And the reason for that is usually very simple. The creative could be missing, the size could have not been declared, etc. But it's obviously a straight out loss of revenue. Finally, the one very crucial point, of course, for any publisher is choosing who to work with. And analytics can also help to do that because it gives you the ability to compute very accurately the value provided by each partner. You'll be able to make the difference between the unique value and the value that is cannibalized between 2 or more SSPs. So you can make the difference and know what incrementality each SSP is bringing. And also, in our case, we have access to a lot of data based by region. So we are able to know if a given SSP has demand in a given region. So we, for example, we have a good breakdown, a good understanding of what SSP bids in France, what SSP bids in the US, what SSP has demand in Germany or does not have demand in Germany. And this is data that will obviously be helpful for a publisher when it comes to choosing who to work with. Okay, so once you've set things up properly, once you have your bidders plugged into your inventory properly, once your sizes are homogeneous, once you're sending the proper amount of bid requests, what you will want to do is make sure that your bidder are well performing. So now we're not talking anymore about bid requests that are being sent, but now it's about bid responses that are coming back. So it's quite easy to notice if you have a problem because you see it in the revenue. But the question is, where is the issue coming from? Because if you have no revenue, then it could mean several things. It could mean that maybe you are not printing. It could mean that you are not receiving a bid response, or it could mean that you are not rendering. It could mean that Prebid is not concluding the auction. So there are a lot of possibility, and having the proper metrics help you identify what the issue is. And one very common issue is the problem where your SSP is being requested, but it is never sending any bid response back. And this is usually a sign that you have a broken ad slot within your inventory. So it could be a problem with the ads.txt, or it could be a placement ID that was misconfigured in your SSP. The thing is, you will want to be able to spot that very quickly, and you will want to also be aware when this kind of things happen in the future, because as everybody knows here, Previd and programmatic is very complex on the technical standpoint, and it's not too rare that you have ad slots breaking and monetization coming to a halt. This is why if you have access to an analytical tool that can provide you with real-time data, it will help you save your revenue, because you will not have to wait until maybe the end of the month when the bills come to know that you have an issue with your monetization. And finally, one very essential advantage of having access to the proper analytical tool is the granularity. Because when you see a problem within your monetization, let's say you have a decrease in revenue, it's incredibly crucial to be able to pinpoint where the problem is coming from. And to do that, you need the proper granularity, because you can get misguided. For example, you can be under the impression that there is a decrease of revenue across all of your inventory, whereas in reality, it could be that on one specific country, your monetization has stopped completely. And this is why your global average is decreasing. For example, this can happen when it comes to GDPR. If there is a problem with the way that with the way that GDPR is being parsed, you could have issues there, and we've seen monetization stopped because of consent problems. So this could be one issue. Obviously, the most common granularity that one should always look at is ad unit, website, device. These are the most common where you see a mistake, where you see an issue. Okay, so this was about making sure that nothing breaks down on the ad stack, and now we're going to go into more proactive optimizations. So the first insights that I want to share with you, so it's about floor prices. Because I see a lot of publishers who are a bit skeptical about floor prices, that are afraid of the unproductive back and forth that can occur when it comes to floor prices. And I want to reassure everyone that there is a straightforward and reliable way to make floor prices work for you. So floor prices, it's not only about cutting off low CPM impressions and making sure that you have no low quality ad on your inventory. It can also help you increase your revenue. So how does this work? What we have found basically is that if you send the floor price information to your SSP with the proper canal, so through the proper flow, basically, the SSP will in turn send this information, provide the buyers, so the DSPs and the buyers, with this information about the floor, and in turn the CPM that comes back from the auction flow will be adapted to reach the floor. Obviously, this will not be the case on all opportunities. So to take a very simple example, if you increase your floors from 10 cents to 20 cents, you will maybe have half of the bid responses that would have been under 20 cents that will be completely discarded. So you will not get any bid response in this case. But the other half will benefit from what we call a CPM ramp up, meaning that the buyer will increase the CPM in order to reach the floor. Because the reasoning is that once the buyer has the floor information, it knows that there is no use bidding under the floor, and then it can make its own calculation as to whether it is profitable for them to reach the floor and bid above the floor. And this is not something that is a simple hypothesis. This have been proved. So we have seen this behavior simply by looking at the bid distribution for the bidders on which the floor was increased. And we can see that there is an increase in the percentage of no bids, but we can also see that there is an increase in the percentage of bids that are above the new floor compared to before. And also, obviously, we haven't stopped there. We've also A/B tested this, and this has shown that a higher floor, can sometimes provide higher revenue. So what's the typical process that you want to follow? The first step is quite obvious. It's to be able to spot what floors are currently applied. And to do that, we have a tried out process that works very well. On our end, what we do is we look at all of the CPMs of all of the bid responses that we have received from the SSP, and we look what is the lowest one. Right? So we find the lowest CPM on each element of the inventory for each SSP. And if you look at a significant number of bid responses, if you look at the volume that is big enough, chances will be that this will be the floor that is being applied by the SSP. So this could be either a floor that you have set up as a publisher, but it can also be the case that it's a floor that is applied internally by the SSP, and in which case you won't have any control over it. For example, you have TIDs that will never bid under 10 cents. So this is one key step, because you might find, as we have found in the past on several occasions, that you have legacy floor that are excessively high, that are hindering your monetization process, because it's bringing your bid rate to a value that is way too low for it to be worth it. Then what you will want to do, as I said, is enforce your floors both on the SSP side and in GAM. So you will want to have floors in the SSP, either in the dashboard, or you can do it through the wrapper within the bid request. And also you want to have a UPR in GAM, because GAM is also a benefit from this behavior that we have called ramp up of CPM. And if you put pressure on ADEX with the UPR, then you will see the CPM increase, and you will see the revenue increase as well if it is done properly and if you A/B test the process. So finally, the competition should be homogeneous. So you should have the same floors on all of your SSPs for optimal results. And also you should make sure that ADEX is following the same rules as the SSPs. And the last step, if you have the necessary dev resources, what is optimal is to use a dynamic process which is continuous, which is simply run a continuous A/B test on floors to make sure that at all times your default population is the one that has the optimal floor. So basically, you will be testing different floor values, and every week, every month, you will be checking what population has brought the most revenue, and you will apply this population to the bulk of your inventory. So before we get to the next slide, I think we will ask you to fill in another poll just to see what kind of strategy you guys are applying in terms of floor prices. And while you do that, I'm going to introduce the next topic. So the next topic is about timeouts. So timeouts, I would say not as important as floors, but definitely something not to be overlooked. Why is it interesting? It's interesting because not only does it have an impact on revenue, it also has an impact on page speed and site performance as a whole. Also, what we have found quite often is on the publisher that we onboard is that a lot of publishers are not monitoring timeout. And this could be fine if you have no problem in terms of timeout, but it could be also a huge overlook if you find after looking at the data that your timeout rates are excessively high. Timeout rates have increasing impact, basically. So the higher the timeout rate, the more the impact is important. For example, if you have a timeout that's at 10%, compared to a timeout at 20%, the timeout at 20% will be more than twice as damaging as the timeout as 10%, which is why it's excessively important to be able to spot where you have if you have a problem with timeouts. So maybe a quick word about how we measure timeouts. We simply analyze all of the bid responses that come back, and we divide the number of bid responses that have timed out by the number of bid requests that have been sent. So basically, there is three possible states for a bid response. Either the bid response has arrived, or the bidder has responded with no bid, or the bidder has timed out, so no responses arrived in time. And this is the percentage that we are focusing on for this slide and today. So what can you do when it comes to timeout? First of all, again, this is where the proper granularity comes into play. If you have the proper granularity, you can isolate sections that could have a higher timeout than usual. And this will help you pinpoint if you have problems in the way that the auction is happening. Usually, what we find is that the timeouts are higher on mobile than on desktop. And also, the timeouts depend a lot of the country where you are advertising, which is pretty obvious because this in turn impacts the internet speed. So this will help you in order to set a strategy that adapts to these elements, and also in order to spot if you have a specific issue. If we see timeouts that are as high as 50%, then it's quite obvious that something irregular is going on. Then what this will allow you to do is if you consider your SSPs and the percentage of timeouts that your SSP have, you will be able to use this data to optimize for page speed. Because if you consider the way that the auction happens, all the SSPs answer simultaneously, which means that the auction is only as long as the slowest of your SSP. And it also means that it only takes one SSP reaching the timeout for your auction to last this long. Which is why, if you look at the example that we have screenshot and put on the slide, you can see if you take the in-read ad units example, this is data for one SSP only. And you can see that these ad units show a tremendously high amount of timeout for a revenue that is almost insignificant. And in this case, what is happening is that you are bringing your auction to a timeout, which means your auction is lasting as long as your timeout in this percentage of occasion when you call this bidder. For what? For a very insignificant amount of revenue. So the conclusion in this case would be to unplug this SSP from these ad units. This is an example where the SSP in question does not have any demand for the in-read ad units. And the conclusion is quite obvious. Now, the second very important topic is obviously revenue, because the higher the timeouts, the lower the number of bid responses that you're receiving, and therefore the lower your revenue is. And in this case, it's pretty straightforward. What we did is simply A/B test different timeouts, and we looked at, of course, revenue metrics, and also at some metrics that could give us an indication about page performance and impact on user experience. So, for example, we looked at viewability, we looked at CTR, we looked at auction per session, and this data led us to the conclusion that on most of the setup that we have analyzed, the ideal timeout setup in terms of revenue and page speed was between 2,000 and 2,500. Now, of course, this is mostly true for Europe, but it will be a different story when it comes to other regions of the world. If you talk about India, if you're talking about South America, you will not have the same timeout rates. They will be a bit higher for these values. So you will need to adapt these results a little bit. And why not run your own A/B tests? Okay, so let's move on to the next topic. So Now let's talk a little bit about ad discrepancies. So ad discrepancies is something that we were a bit dubious about. We didn't know quite well how to handle this, but it turned out that there is a lot of value that can be made by understanding why there are ad discrepancies. So the way that we define ad discrepancies is discrepancies happen when the data that you are collecting from the browser and the data that you are collecting from your SSP or your ad server is different. And what this means usually is either there is a problem with the way you collect data, and this can happen, obviously, but these is pretty rare, and this does not help us. So it's not really the focus of today. What this usually means in 99% of the cases, it means that there is a difference between what is happening on the page with the auction, with the pre-bid auction, and what you are being paid by your partners. And there can be several reasons for that. We will go over each of them. We have listed the four main reasons. So the most common one is if you are not adjusting for net versus gross bids. So basically, if you have an SSP that is bidding in gross, it will have an inflated CPM on the page compared to the CPM that will actually be paid to you. The problem with that is that if this SSP is competing with other partners on the page who are bidding with a net bid, then you are at risk of losing money because let's take a very simple example. If you have an SSP that is usually taking a cut of 15%, so its gross bid will be €1 in this example, but the net bid will be 85 cents. If it bids in gross, then it will beat other potential competitor who will bid in the range of 85 cents to €1, and you will be losing the difference between this, because this SSP will win and it will pay a lower CPM than what you could have been paid by these other demand sources. So this is a pretty straightforward issue. How do you spot that? Well, if you look at the day-by-day breakdown of your discrepancies and you find that there is a constant discrepancy day over day, usually it's around 10%, 15%, depending on the fee that the SSP is taking, then this will indicate that you have this kind of problem, and the solution is fairly simple. You can use the bid adjustment module of Prebid in order to transform these gross bids into net bids. The second issue is a bit similar to that because it's also spotted by looking at the day-over-day difference, and also by observing that this difference is constant day over day. But this time, the difference doesn't occur because of net versus gross, but it occurs because of conversion issues. Obviously, you could have both issues at once. But in this specific case, due to conversion, this is a bit different because now the solution will be to use the conversion module of Prebid. And also the issue could be far greater because let's say if your problem is that you are not converting USD in euros and you have a partner that is bidding in USD and competing against other SSPs bidding in euros, then you'll have a bit of a difference, but nothing too great. But now, if you consider a situation where you have a bidder that is bidding in Brazilian real, in Turkish lira, or in Danish krona, and this bidder is competing against other bidders that are bidding in USD, now you're looking at a difference that is 6 to 10-fold. So what you'll have in essence is a bidder that will have a CPM value of 1, where maybe the real value will be 10 cents, and this bidder will beat every single CPM between 10 cents and 1, and you will not see the color of that money, basically. So very obvious why you should look out for this kind of issue. Okay, so now on to the more complicated issues. This is much more complex problems. The one other problems would be different calculation standards. So this typically happens when sometimes you have partners that do not count impressions as soon as they are rendered, but they actually will wait maybe until 1 second. This typically happens for video. Some some partners will count an impression only after maybe 1 second of the video has been viewed. Also, you can run into a kind of issue where some partners will be hiding their CPMs and bidding with a fixed CPM, but this fixed CPM will not be the CPM that is being paid. And the other examples that are possible, we haven't come across the whole spectrum, and it's very hard to know exactly what is going on. But these are the cases that have been confirmed. What can you do in this case? It's a bit of a hassle. There is no perfect solution. What you could do if you have access to the proper data is estimate how much you are losing, because maybe what you will find. So basically, what you want to do is compare what the SSP is paying you with what other SSPs could have been paying you had they won the auction. And if you find that the first number is lower than the second, then your SSP is not bringing you any value. It's costing you money. This is one possibility. The second possibility, because usually there is still some value that is being made, even if it's not as much as there could be. Second possibility is that you will want to estimate how much you are losing, what percentage of the value is not being paid, and you will want to adjust the CPM with that percentage. So basically, if you find that your SSP is only paying half of your impressions, of the impressions that it is winning, then you will want to have their CPM as well to adjust for that. It's not an ideal situation, but this helps a bit in order to have a fairer competition and a more optimal auction. Last point will be about technical problems. So this is last but not least, because this can lead to huge losses actually. This happens when the rendering event on the page does not coincide with the ad being actually rendered. So what will happen is that if you're listening to the events on the page, you will detect an impression, but the ad will not actually render on the page. And why does the ad not render? There are a lot of possible issues. It could be technical issues. It could be that simply the ad slot is missing on the page. There has been a problem with with building the page layout. It could be also that you have been declaring a size client side, but this size has no creative in GAM. Or this size has no placement, or the size creative is missing in the SSP dashboard. So both issues are possible. And in this case, it's a big problem because your SSP wins the auction with the selected size, but it is unable to print. Quick word about the couple of examples that we have listed here. The first one, it's about conversion, and we've calculated this number based on a unique value that was provided by the SSP compared to the adjusted value after removing the 15% cut and comparing that to what SSPs have been bidding on the same opportunities. And obviously, you can imagine this is a big account, but these numbers stack up fairly quickly. So this is one example. The second example, 100K estimated annual programmatic earnings. This issue was because some ad units were unable to render, and we have found that discrepancies could amount as high as around 10K every month. For we've calculated for a couple of months, and so if we expand to the whole year, this amounted to around 100K. So something actually very huge in this specific case. I'll take a couple of minutes maybe to answer questions. So, or should we do that at the end?
Yeah, I think we should do that at the end.
At the end? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's keep going. One last slide for me. So let's talk a little bit about header bidding density. So I've said a couple of words at the beginning about having the proper partners plugged into your inventory, and this metrics that we are computing here speaks to that. So the way that we calculate this metric, we divide the number of bid responses by the number of auctions. And this tells you the state of the competition, because you know basically how many bids on average you get whenever you hold an auction. And in programmatic, as in real life, if you are holding an auction, you want as many bidders as possible, because you will have higher prices and you will also have a higher chance of someone actually winning the auction. So what's the problem if you have a low header bidding density? Well, the issue is that the lower the header bidding density, the higher the number of auctions that will finish without any winning bid, which means without any bid response. This is obviously a problem. You have inventory that is going to waste. It will basically be probably picked up by your ad server, but at a much lower eCPM, so not as interesting for you. Also, the problem will be you will have a lower eCPM. It's quite significant in the example that we're showing on the screen. So the data has been anonymized as for every slide in this presentation, but these are the actual data. And you can see in this specific case, you have websites that are fairly similar, but you have one website where the density is much lower than the others, and the consequence on the fill rate of pre-bid and on the eCPM is fairly obvious. So what can you do? You have a low density, you see the problem. It's very important, of course, to pinpoint that this is the issue specifically, because you can have websites where the performances are bad, but the density is very high. And in this case, you want to look elsewhere. So one more reason why it's important to have access to the proper metrics when it comes to analytics. In this case, you've identified the problem. Your header bidding density is very low. What can you do? The very obvious answer that comes to mind is to add more SSPs. Not always the best solution, but it is the easiest one when it comes to being very straightforward. And also, it is actually most of the time the issue, because the reason why usually you have a low density is because either you don't have enough partners, or the partners that you have do not have enough demand on the region that you are advertising to. This is fairly obvious when you look at, if I maybe consider some of our partners who are currently operating in Europe and want to expand to the US. They sometimes find that the SSPs that they currently have are not the best one when it comes to performances overseas. So one simple example. And in this case, you will of course want to look at what SSPs perform best for your region and add those ones. Another problem could be that the current SSPs that you have are performing poorly. So some of these issues we have seen in the first slides, if you remember, about bidder performances, making sure that your bid rates are good, making sure that your SSPs are bidding, that you don't have any high floor that is hindering your competition, that you don't have any issue with with the quality of your ad unit. So you can look at things like viewability. You can look at where your ad unit is placed on the page. You can look at what price floors you're applying, etc. And yeah, that's pretty much sums it up. The reasoning is the following. Make sure your header bidding density is high. Just to give you maybe one point of reference, one benchmark, we have found that when you get over 3 in terms of header bidding density, it usually stops becoming an issue, because you have maybe more than 90% of the auctions that are filled, and it stops making it so that your eCPM is lower than what it could be. So up to you, Adrien, now for viewability.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to try to wrap up this in 5 minutes, and we'll be able to answer the questions. So yeah, the idea now is to talk a little bit about two topics that are very broad, but the idea is to give a very quick overview. It's viewability and refresh, basically. So on viewability, why does viewability matters? Well, it matters because on the demand side, on DSP side, they have different options to filter the inventory they are going to buy on viewability metrics. They can, for instance, decide to buy only on inventory that whose viewability is higher than X%, or they can decide to only buy on the top 100 ad units in France in terms of viewability. So that's why it's an important metric. So we run a few A/B tests, and also we did an analysis on our publishers, and the finding there are good news and bad news in the findings. Basically, the bad news is that it's impossible to have a beautiful equation which would tell you if you increase your viewability by 10%, you're going to increase your revenue by X%. That's not possible. The good news of the finding is that we clearly saw that viewability has indeed an impact on how the bidders bid. So it has an impact on your CPM, on your RPM, which is the revenue you get for 1,000 auctions. But there's no clear correlation. Basically, there's a correlation, but it's hard to say exactly how much you improve. Basically, what we saw is that there were thresholds. Basically, it seemed that you have thresholds that are around like 35% and 65%, where you have like big steps in terms of CPM and RPM, so in terms of revenue, meaning that if you manage to pass this threshold of viewability, you're going to get a significant increase in your CPM and your RPM. The other thing that we found out is that the average view time, okay, of the display seems to have an indirect impact on the revenue, okay, mainly through click-through rate, because it seemed that the lower the average view time is, the lower the click-through rate is, okay, and that's this potentially this smaller click-through rate that can impact the CPM and the RPM. But what we also found out, and this is very important, is the key element you need to take away, is that there's a trade-off between viewability and impressions, because obviously, if you try to have your inventory more viewable, you might end up cutting off some impressions. And what we saw is that very often the uplift in terms of CPM that you get from being more viewable doesn't counterbalance for the revenue brought by the impression that you cut off to be more viewable. Okay, so it's important, especially when you want to implement lazy loading, which is one of the first way to improve viewability. It's always a good thing, like, to really A/B test this to be able to say if the trade-off for you is positive, because we did an A/B test with one of our publisher, where the trade-off for lazy loading was negative in the end. It was better for him to not lazy load. We did another one where it was positive for him to lazy load. And it's especially hard to reach a conclusion because those CPM impacts are very often in the medium to long term, not in the short term. Okay? But for that, you also need to keep in mind that it's not only the programmatic revenue that is important, because maybe you want to be more viewable, to be able to sell more direct campaigns, because a lot of advertisers want to have on direct campaigns at least 60 or 70% of viewability. So there's not only a trade-off on programmatic revenue, there's also other way to monetize a better viewability. So how to increase the viewability? Three levers, essentially for us: lazy loading, also optimize your layout. Basically, you can also implement sticky ads, and also, and that's the link with the last slide, implement a high quality refresh, or what we call an in-view refresh. You want to refresh your ads when the user is seeing them, basically. Because if you're doing that, your refresh are going to be 100% viewable. So a quick word to wrap this up on refreshing ads, because at Pubstack, basically we have a module that is doing this for our publishers. So we run a lot of tests to know, what should we do on what the good strategy for refreshing ads. Okay, so what we found out is that more often than not, refreshing ad does not impact negatively the SSP's bidding patterns. Okay, so it's very rare that they react negatively to a publisher starting refreshing ads. Okay, it happens. Okay, so in that case, on our side, we can implement specific rules to not call, to not refresh those SSPs. But basically, it's something that you need to monitor. Some SSPs can react badly, okay, but it's rare. The second point is that if you're refreshing out of view right now, refreshing in view can sometimes yield more revenue, because SSPs are going to react positively to the increased viewability. We saw that on several publishers. They had like a refreshing on out of view, which was kind of aggressive. And when we cut it off and we went to in-view refreshing, some SSPs like started bidding like crazy, like way better than before. Okay, and finally, it's often a given that refreshing ad is only for desktop devices, but it can work also on mobile devices, with one caveat that you need to be aggressive. Okay, you need to put an aggressive strategy. What we saw on our test is that below a 15 seconds timer, it was very hard, except if the ad unit was sticky on a mobile, because on mobile sometimes you have some, for instance, some sticky footers. So it was very hard to have refresh opportunities with a more conventional timer of 20 or 30 seconds. Okay. One quick tip on if you want to implement or improve the way you refresh ads, you can have a look at the average view time metric that is given by Google Ad Manager to estimate what a good timer would be to have refresh opportunities in the end. Because if your ad unit on average is viewable like 10 seconds, if you put a 20-second timer, you're not gonna end up having a big uplift. So before we conclude, maybe we can take a few questions that were in the chat. There was one that I just put aside for now, but maybe before taking the question, maybe just conclude if some people need to leave, because we're reaching the end of the webinar. So basically, thanks everybody for attending. If you leave the webinar, you're gonna have, I guess, a pop-up, which is a survey. Would be very glad if you can answer it. And also, I'm told that we'll be providing private sessions for publishers who want to. You just have to ask to contact us to go over your ad stack to potentially spot like potential optimizations. So now that's out of the way, we can say goodbye to everyone who doesn't want to hear the answer to the questions, and we can answer the questions. So there were two questions about the floor, I guess, which were, the first one was taking into consideration first price auction competition, what is the value of floor optimization? So I can quickly answer this one. So basically, obviously, in a first price world, it's kind of, I mean, it makes sense that if you put a floor when you don't have a floor, you're going to cut off revenue. Okay. But there are a lot of publishers who are not only focused on revenue, but also on other trade-off, like they want to attain a certain fill rate or to have a given CPM. Okay, so that's part of a reason why flow optimization can be applied, because they want to know if it's better to have a 20-cent floor or a 30-cent floor.
Yeah,
Another,
this is something. So this is something that we didn't really talk about during the presentation. But yes, it is sometimes interesting to reach a certain CPM in order to make campaigns run. But yeah, what we are considering here is the ramp up of CPM that you can get from the floor, right?
yes, and also what Danny talked about and what we saw on a few SSP, sometimes having a floor on a SSP is going to be this SSP is going to bring to that floor bids that would be below the floor if in a no floor setting. So that's a side effect that also can be attained by floor optimization. Even though I kind of agree with, if you're only focused on programmatic revenue and you don't have floor, putting a floor would probably cut off some of your revenue. That's true.
So in the I said in the comment, Adrien, that we had a possible value that could be attained was 10%. If you remember, when we ran the test, what percentage of increase did we get? But that was only for ADEX.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't have that at the top of my head. Sorry.
Okay.
Do we have so which question do we still have?
So about price floor adapter. Yes, so I answered a bit quickly in the chat. For the adapter, you will need to look at your SSPs, because first of all, not all SSPs will try to read the value provided by the adapter. So maybe some of your SSPs will not work with your adapter. And also, I'm unaware of whether the floor that from the adapter overrides the floor that could be set up by the SSP. I assume it should be the case, but it's still better to check. And again, this is a value that you can get if you check all of the bid responses that come back. You will know what the floor is. So if you're running something that is dynamic, you would need to also add this tag on your specific population to be able to split your data. But you will be able to see what is the floor that is enforced, and you can check if it's working or not.
We have a very good remark from Aviram saying that 10-second refreshing is against Google policy. So that's true. Google policy is 30 seconds, but it's 30 seconds, and most of the time it's out of view. So 10-second in view is way less aggressive than 30-second out of view. So that would be my first answer, because as far as I know, Google policy just say 30 seconds, but it doesn't say in view or out of view or whatever. So yes, 10 seconds in view. On the test we did, when we did 10 seconds in view, we had way less refresh opportunities than 30 seconds out of view. And then the way Google handles refreshes and the way publisher tend to, I say, communicate to Google if it's a refresh or not, it's still blurry, let's say it like that. A lot of people just don't say to Google that what they're sending are refreshing opportunities without, how do you say that, without like punishment from Google up until now. So yeah, but yeah, the Google policy is 30 seconds, but it doesn't mention out of view or in view. And if you're doing 10-second in view, it's way less aggressive than 30-second out of view.
So we have a question also about rendering issues. So for that, you want to consider when the event is fired on the page. So what we look for is the bid one event from prebid, which indicates that your bidder has won the impression and has taken over the specific opportunities. And you want to compare that with the number of impressions that you can see either in your ad server or from your SSP. And this is the difference that you want to look at, basically.
Okay, do we still have a few questions?
Gert asked kind of a hard question. What is the best tool solution to do A/B testing? It's really up to your developer team, I would say. I'm not aware of any tool that would help split your traffic. Yeah, it really depends on how you run the website, where you're hosted. Maybe if you're on WordPress, it's a bit harder to A/B test rather than if you own your infrastructure. Yeah, that is a bit of a technical question.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say we're going to be releasing very soon some material about A/B testing that will include a couple of examples. So we are preparing right now an article about the topic that should help. But it does require some dev work, which it could be harder for some publishers than others, obviously.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Danny. Maybe we should say that all the A/B tests we did, we didn't use any tool. Basically, it was a split that was made on the dev side, and then we use our tool to monitor and to analyze it, basically. That's why, yeah, I have no idea of what the tools are to split the traffic, basically. We have a question from Viswa on the refresh time. What is the average refresh time for desktop you've experimented with? Basically, on average, we're doing 20-second in view, basically. That's the timer we're playing with most of the time. Okay, we have a question from someone who left, so we'll send him an email. Yeah. Okay, I have a question from Alex also. Is it possible to block bids coming in other currencies than a list of supported ones? So not that I'm aware of. Maybe without dev work, I'm not sure. Alex, if you're still here, I'll send you the link to the currency module in Prebid. So maybe there's a feature in it, but I'm not aware of it. So if it's not in the Prebid module, then it's dev work.
Yeah, and it should be doable because you have the information of the currency within your within the response. But and what you could do, for example, is use the bid adjustment module and set up a rule, or even set up a rule after your auction in your bids back handler from Prebid, telling saying that you want to discard the bids that. So not in the bids back handler, sorry, but in the bid adjustment module, you can put an if that will discard essentially the bids that are not in the currency that you want. But it's not exactly what you want to do. Ideally, what you would want to do is convert those bids. Because an SSP is always going to bid with the same currency. So if you are blocking those bids, it breaks it down to simply blocking the SSP.
Okay, so for me, we have one last question from Bronislava, but it's a little bit technical, so I guess I'll follow up on this one. And I think we're through with the questions. It's my fault. I told you guys to put the question in the chat section. I shouldn't have done that. So I'm sorry. So if we forgot a question, do a big shout out in the chat section. But I think we're good. Okay. So thanks a lot, everybody, for attending. And have a good afternoon and rest of the week. Bye, Danny.
Thank you, guys. Bye, everyone.